Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so tonight's episode of Doctor Who was an episode I'd been sort of very apprehensive about for a while, and you've been apprehensive about for 2 days, thanks to your massive ability to avoid spoilers.
Yeah, I had about 48 hours of warning about what this episode was gonna include.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty stressful 48 hours.
I was pleasantly surprised. There was exactly one thing in terms of just in terms of how the subject matter was handled that I would have preferred they didn't do. But it's only one thing out of an episode that was essentially the writing equivalent of running into a minefield, like blindly just like waving your arms around. Only coming away with one minor issue in regards to how the respectfulness of and the historicalness of it was handled is pretty impressive.
I agree that they avoided like disaster on that sort of a thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I do not think that made it a good episode.
Oh, okay. I think we're gonna have a disagreement again, and
I had
this
a
time it's
feeling.
gonna be we're gonna be back to the usual where I'm much more positive than you are.
Right. I think that's where we're headed. Like my
Yeah.
I've had about 24 hours to digest this. I've watched it twice actually. You watched it
I've watched.
30
I
minutes
literally
ago.
just finished watching it like half an hour ago.
Yeah. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic because
Yeah. So
I
I
wasn't
haven't
sure
I
how I
haven't had as
felt.
much time to think about it.
Yeah, I've been sitting on this for about a day now, and I watched it again, and it didn't really change much of my opinion. There was a couple things that were cleared up, and a couple things that stood out a little bit more.
Hmm.
But more or less, I'm the same as where I was when I first watched it, which was
Yeah.
I think that they avoided disaster, the kind of disaster that everyone was afraid of when they heard what the title was and what it was going to be about. But because of the subject, because of the way they have to handle this, you have to have Rosa Parks make the decision herself. You cannot have the Doctor influence that. That would be wrong in
Yes.
so many
Yeah.
ways. I think it hamstrung the episode. And
I
for the
can see
most
that.
part, yeah, for the most part, I think they did all right. It's kind of the opposite to last week, where last week was good idea, poor execution. I think this is poor idea, decent execution. I
Yeah.
do
So.
have I do have one big problem with the execution, which I'll come back to later.
Mm. So for me, I quite liked it just because I think we've both talked about wanting to have a pure historical Doctor Who episode again, and this
Mm-hmm.
wasn't quite because Krasko is from the future, but it was essentially like a Monster 3 episode where the only interference was by time travelers, which is the closest we've gotten to a pure historical since like one Peter Davison story in the 1980s.
Yeah,
So on, yeah,
if you had told me that this season would include the most pure historical that we have had since decades, I would have been so happy. And I'm whelmed.
yeah. So it wouldn't have been my first choice for a historical event for essentially the reasoning that you said, and the reasoning I think that it's a minefield, which is that it's an event where there's not really anything for the Doctor and her companions to do.
Exactly.
But they did have a good way of handling it, where they had, by having the idea of there's someone trying to interfere with history, and so they've got to make sure that events proceed the way they would proceed. And so I thought that was a good idea. Again, I feel like it was an excellently executed episode, but I am kind of curious as to why they felt that doing an episode around Rosa Parks was a good idea.
I think, and this might be a bit of a controversial take. So the main writer for the episode, Marjorie Blackman, is I think the first black woman to write Doctor Who. Is that right?
Yes,
Uh,
yes, at the very
yeah,
least for the series. I'm not sure
for the
about like
series,
all of the expanded like
books and
novels and
yeah,
things, but I think maybe even for those, which is really pathetic when you think about it, like
it
given
is
how long
like
Doctor Who's been around.
you have half a century to do this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like she felt pressured to honor that in some way in her script, and I don't think she needed to. I don't know if that played into it at all. It
I
could
d-
be she just had this idea for a while, but it feels, because I'm with you, it feels like why would they pick this very restrictive concept for a pure historical?
mm, yeah, so I felt like it worked out well. So it could have just been a case of she actually had this conception from the start of this is how she was going to make the episode play out,
Mm-hmm.
of someone trying to interfere with history. But yeah, so it is an odd concept, but I felt like it worked, so I'm not going to give it too much flack over the whole picking Rosa Parks was a really dangerous, like, not so great idea. Because, yeah, it's something where if you give the doctor any role in inspiring her or telling her what to do, then it's taking away her agency, and it makes it really uncomfortable to be like the civil rights movement was
Right,
actually inspired by an alien who looks like a white woman, or
right.
even
That would have
worse, white
been,
man
or
in the
at
early
least,
eras.
yeah, at least it would have been a woman if they had
Yeah,
done that. Yeah,
yeah.
it's there was really only one path for this episode, and they picked the right path, but the
Mm.
whole time I was watching the episode, I kind of knew this was either going to be the worst episode ever because they would say the Doctor started the civil rights movement, or yeah, or it's going to be Rosa Parks doing her thing, which is what it was, and so there was this is kind of my one of my big two big complaints about it. There was never any tension. Like I knew that that was going to be how the episode was going to unravel because I
Really? You
did
didn't
not.
think there was any tension in this episode? Because there
There
were
was no
so many
tension.
scenes where I was kind of almost edge of my seat.
So
Not in regards to whether they would succeed, obviously, but I feel like in almost every given Doctor Who episode, I'm not just like, will the Earth really be invaded and humanity
mm,
wiped out? Like, I know that's not going to happen. But in this case, they're like the scenes, like with just like the scene at the restaurant when it just suddenly gets really quiet and everyone's staring at them. Like when the police officer bursts into the motel room, like that was the most tense. That was the kind of tension I could have done with last week. That was the kind of those were really
uh,
tense scenes. They were very well written, I think.
the scene in the motel room was the only scene where I felt any level of suspense. Like the scenes with them running into people in Montgomery and them being racist were impactful. I'm not quite sure what the word is, but there was never suspenseful at all. And there was
Really?
never any doubt. Yeah, I never had any doubt about what the resolution was going to be. That they
I
were going to
don't
be
see
part of
that's
events, and
yeah.
yeah.
Well, the thing for me is I'm gonna say that a somewhat cynical perspective on this is I don't think that it significantly matters whether you know what the resolution of events is going to be. Because,
Not
like I said, the
necessarily.
majority, you know that they're not just going to randomly kill off a companion halfway through the series most of the time. So it just comes down to does the scene feel tense and well constructed, and I think that these scenes do.
Well, like when I watch a movie, like just to throw the most cliche one out there, Empire Strikes Back, where I know the ending, I can usually still feel suspense and thrills and
Yeah,
tension, even though I know what's happening. And even though I
yeah,
did know for sure in this one, I felt no sense of, oh my god, how are they going to get out of this? Which is usually the feeling that you try to, yeah, you know that they're going to
right,
do it,
yeah,
you don't know how. And I felt like it was very
yeah.
simplistic too. Like last week, problem solution, problem solution. There wasn't really
Mm.
anything clever to the way that they solved it.
I
Like
I
literally,
liked
they
it
solved the
better.
bad guy by shooting him.
Yeah. Well, I liked it better this week simply because the problem solution felt like almost like a chess game between the Doctor and Krasko, rather
A
than
bit.
just the environment throwing a problem at them and then them solving it. It felt like a case of they solved one of Krasko's ideas, Krasko came up with another idea, and then they countered that. It felt like it's like a dialogue almost, rather than just the plot says that now we have to move on to the next obstacle.
The plot did say that that one guy's wife really liked Sinatra, and he really fell for some obvious scheme thing.
Yeah, I felt like that scene was it was slightly it was kind of just as like a comedic, light-hearted beat, but yeah, I don't know. That bit was a little bit weak because it did feel like he fell for what seemed like it would be an obvious scam. It
Mm-hmm.
would what would have worked really well is if the guy had called the doctor on it being a scam, and then the doctor had been like absolutely not, and then the guy's like phone rings or something, and he picks it up and it's Frank Sinatra.
Right, or Elvis,
Or
tie in the
Elvis,
whole. I
yeah.
guess,
Well, no. The scene
yeah,
does tie into Elvis because she says, "Thank goodness that Elvis gave Frank Sinatra my phone,
right,
explicitly against what I told him to do."
right. So it
Yeah.
did come in there. I think though that's basically my problem with like every problem solution in this episode, where they could have had a lot more to it, but it was very much the first thing they tried solved it. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
I didn't.
Especially with the
Yeah.
bus. Like the bus was kind of solved off screen, and there was never any tension of, oh my
Yeah.
god, they don't have a bus, because like next shot they have a bus. Like,
Well, that's the thing to me that it didn't feel like it was supposed to be like a super tense, like how are they? There was one bit which was like how do they make sure there are going to be enough passengers?
mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, I mean they solved that one by sitting down, but it felt that one was kind of like it felt like an almost sort of like how are they going to get around that one? But other than that, it didn't feel so much like the doctor is like completely challenged and might fail, but it just felt like a case of the doctor was sort of cleverly and quickly dealing with each thing as it came up, but it was just a question of how many things would there be and would they add up to being. Which was the whole point. The guy was saying that little things changing the course of history.
Yes, although I have to be that guy to point out that it wasn't that Rosa Parks sat
Yeah,
or refused to get up from her seat, and then suddenly civil rights movement was a thing. They were looking for a case to
yeah.
make
So that's what I
the
said when I said there
catalyst.
was one thing that I felt like they messed up on. That was the
Yeah.
one thing. Was there had been another woman who had where the same situation had happened and it had happened sort of genuinely for her, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, and they felt like she wasn't a great model to use for she wasn't a great sort of figurehead for the movement
Yeah, I think she
because
was pregnant and
she was
underage.
a teenage, she was a pregnant teenager, which is so it was just sort of a kind of pretty much a marketing almost consideration. But I think it's a very good point that that they would have turned that against them very quickly. And so they Rosa Parks made a deliberate movement as a member of the civil rights as a member of the civil rights movement in collaboration with the other people to keep her seat. But that said, I did feel like the episode left enough ambiguity that could have been the case because it did portray her as being a member of the civil rights movement, which I liked. But
Yeah,
I do think I
I
would
did
have
some
liked it if it
reading.
had been a specific plan.
Yeah,
Which,
I did some reading actually after the episode because I wasn't sure of my history here, and it seemed like there's conflicting accounts on whether that was planned or not. I think Rosa herself said she didn't even plan to when she got on the bus to make her stand there, but she had been active in planning this boycott and starting the civil rights movement in Alabama. So it's like I can forgive
I
them if they
feel like
took a
it's
little
a
bit of a liberty
yeah.
here.
I can forgive that kind of liberty. It's far from no one will ever know that a woman helped win the 100 Years' War in terms of inaccuracy.
I had a solemn vow that I would not mention that line before you did.
I feel
And we
like
could have a
that's
whole other
yeah,
podcast on that line, but for
yeah.
today, that's the one mention we're gonna give with that amazing line. Um, the
Yeah.
accuracy of it, I felt like was actually a strength. Yeah, maybe a little bit of
Yeah.
liberty. I don't really think that the villain had a good plan because it was gonna happen, Rosa Parks or no Rosa Parks, if you ask me.
Mm.
But
Well,
the whole
I think the villain's idea was that by his whole point of he was just going to nudge history, was that
mhm,
just by changing the small events it could change exactly how
the
the
butterfly
movement comes
effect,
down.
maybe, yeah. And he could also be wrong, but it's still his
Yeah.
plan. But
Yes.
I think the accuracy was a big strength. The apparently the
Mm-hmm.
scene where she makes her stand, the dialogue is taken right from her account of the events, what she said, what the bus driver said, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bus looked just like the bus um, that she made her stand on. I looked up
Yeah.
the actual bus, and the set people did a great job once again.
Which
The
is
bus
pretty
looked just
impressive
like it.
given I think this was one of the ones they filmed in South Africa. So
Yeah,
they
it
did
said
a
South Africa
yeah.
in the credits,
Yeah, I think that
which surprised me.
it did a good job of standing in for Southern United States.
Yeah, the sets were once again great.
Yeah.
Direction. I actually did some notes on my phone while I was watching the first time, and one of the notes was, I think it was just close-ups in all caps because again, there's just too many close-ups for me, especially the scene with the Doctor and Kraskow confronting each other in the warehouse. It's
Yeah.
so close on their faces, you can't even see their whole face, and it really annoyed me, and I'm not totally sure why. I'm not really a
Yeah.
film student. I'm a
So
writer,
so
but
I think that they've improved the quality of the cameras and of
mm,
like the so they're shooting at a higher definition, but I don't think the directors are as good as the directors of the Moffat era.
yeah, there's no Rachel Talalay so far.
Yeah,
I hope I'm saying her name right.
yeah, I think that's it. Talalay, possibly. Um,
Possibly. I'm sure
yeah,
she listens to this podcast and she will correct us in the comments.
we
Um,
mention her enough times. She should listen to us.
um, but I guess my other confusion about the villain here is, was he a human from the future or one of the aliens that looked like humans?
He was a human, it seemed like.
That's what I thought. I just felt like it was really weird that a human from the distant future would still be racist towards human races and not like
I
speciesist.
I did feel that, but
Hmm.
I also I feel like it's one of those things of it needs to be that way for the episode to work, and also it could be believable in certain contexts, but the episode wasn't really interested in doing world building of the 79th century. We did get a shout out to Stormcage is also where River Song was held, wasn't it? So that was
I
some
think
clever,
so.
yeah. Plus you had vortex manipulators, so
Cheap and
pretty
nasty
much,
time
yeah,
travel.
pretty much all of the world building was kind of throwbacks to previous Doctor Who episodes. I really liked his lines where he says nobody got hurt, and he's like, well, a few people got killed, and he's like a
A
few
thousand.
hundred, like 1,000, no more than 2,000 or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, he had a couple good lines.
I felt in general the dialogue was much snappier here than it was in the previous episode.
I think because the only lines that Chibnall wrote were and this is another big concern I have, the sappy monologues. I think that was all that Chibnall wrote, and the rest was Blackman. And she did a
Yeah.
really good job. If I'm right here, and I'm not giving Chibnall too little
Yeah, so
credit.
I'm kind of curious to know exactly what Chibnall wrote. It's possible as well that Chibnall's co-writing credits are just so in the Russell T Davies era, he basically rewrote almost every single script at least a little bit, and in some cases essentially like rewriting the entire thing to the point where it might as well have been by Russell T Davies. But he almost never took credit for it until the specials, when he had co-writing credit on all of them.
Mm.
And Stephen Moffat, I know, also did that a few times and didn't claim credit for it sometimes until the end where he started claiming credit for it more. It's possible that Chris Chibnall is just taking credit for the usual show running duties in terms of co-writing, which would be fine because it is essentially co-writing the episode. But I'm saying it's very possible he's just doing the fairly standard, like, touch-ups on the dialogue, making the characters sound like the regular characters, including some details about their pasts or whatever, and
I'm
adding that
hoping that's not
into...
the case because I think this needed a good solid reworking in places, and it feels like those are the places that were likely rewritten by Chibnall if that's the case. Namely monologues, on the nose dialogue, sappiness. I mean, it was remarkably unsubtle in places, and then it was remarkably nuanced in places. I felt like the police officer in the motel was a very realistic and damning portrayal of what many people in the South felt like. And then they would cut right to a very on the nose dialogue about racism in the modern day and whatnot.
I felt like the dialogue about racism in the modern day was very important to the episode, and I liked it because I feel like far too often things about the civil rights movement like to portray it exactly where Ryan says it's not like Rosa Parks ended racism. And a lot of the time, I feel like things about the civil rights movement do portray it as like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King were great people, and then because of them, there is no more racism today.
I agree with that. I think that once again, though, it was turned into an exposition moment instead of
Mm.
just like starting a conversation about racism today. Like it turned into Yaz saying, "Yeah, I'm. This is my background," and Ryan saying, "Yeah, this is my background," and it
I
felt
felt
very
like yeah.
Chibnall-y.
It felt natural to me. I can see why you'd have it like that. I feel like that would be a likely candidate for a Chibnall lines,
Mm-hmm.
just on the grounds that they are things specifically relating to the characters, and that it's very likely that that specific character background details would have come from the head writer rather than from the writer for one episode.
Yeah, that, and then coming right after, I think that what was the best scene in the episode, that made me feel
Mm.
like it was jarring, and then because it was jarring, it made me feel like this specific scene was a Chibnall scene. Scene
Mm.
before that was a
Yeah.
Blackman scene.
I felt like
Um,
even that scene felt much stronger to me than the last episode. In general, this whole one felt better. Actually, the interesting thing is I feel like both of them felt like Hartnell stories to me. In that the first one felt very much like the Hartnell science fiction stories, where it's sort of a lot of exploring a world, and also the pacing is really weird, and there's not much tension sometimes. Whereas this one felt much more like a Hartnell historical episode, where most of the historicals for him were just kind of like they're thrown into historical events and try to survive.
the one historical I've seen is the Aztecs, and I don't even know if I've
Yeah.
seen the whole story. But what I remember, it was very like actiony. You know, they're running around
Yes. Yeah.
being
Yeah.
chased by Aztecs,
It
and
was.
that's more of the route I would take a historical,
Mm,
because especially with something like Rosa
yeah.
Parks, where everyone knows the story. Apparently, I guess maybe not every English person knows the story. I was
And
a
I
little bit
think here's
skeptical.
the
Am
important
I
thing: not every English child knows the story.
okay?
And I
That's
think a
fair.
lot of the time, especially in America, where Doctor Who is mostly watched by like people in their late teens to 20s, we forget that in England, the target audience for Doctor Who is like ages 6 to 12.
I would disagree with that. I think that the target audience is 12 and up. I feel like people overdo the "it's a kids show" angle. I'm
I
sure like plenty of kids watch it, but I think the target audience is a little bit older than people give it credit for sometimes.
I'm gonna tell you that Stephen Moffat directly said that it's written for around that age group. I've never heard any producer of Doctor Who say that that's not the target audience. There's a difference between target audience and the intended entire audience. So Doctor Who's always been a family show, so it's always been intended for people of all ages to watch it. But the like specifically who are they targeting it at tends to be like around 6 to 12, sometimes skewing older and sometimes skewing younger depending on the era and producer.
I think Moffat's wrong. Normally I defer to him, but I think that he's just
well, I'm just telling you, if
categorically wrong
Moffat
he
says
thinks
that's
that.
who his target audience is, then that's who his target audience is, because the definition of your target audience is who you're targeting.
Yeah, well, I guess if you're targeting a younger English audience, I guess, yeah, you can assume that they probably don't know the Rosa Parks story.
Yeah.
Um,
That's why
but it does
yeah.
it does feel like, especially because it's such a big thing in America now. I don't know, maybe being too American centric, that they should have gone for a more, if not obscure, a more like malleable moment in history. Like you could do the Hundred Years' War, or all.
For my choices for historicals, I generally tend to pick people who are somewhat obscure that I feel like people should know more about,
Mm-hmm.
or that I think it would be like an interesting story to tell. So I wouldn't have gone for Rosa Parks, but I can see that they went for Rosa Parks because Rosa Parks is well known to the point where you can just totally episode Rosa. But also that there are members of the audience who don't necessarily know everything about her. And
It
so
did feel like it was specifically partly educational, which I think was the point of the original
It did,
historicals.
yes.
And so yeah, if that was the aim, to be more of like a somewhat educational throwback episode for the Yunnins, I would give it more credit. But I'm judging it as a sci-fi drama for teens and young adults.
Yeah. Okay.
Here.
That's fair. I was specifically mentioning it in regards to the whether the audience needs to be told about Rosa Parks, and I was saying that I feel like a younger British audience especially does need to be told about Rosa Parks, and you can't just assume they know who she is.
Yeah, we Americans can sometimes feel like everyone knows everything about America.
Like because Rosa Parks is taught in schools, but I don't know at what age, and I don't know how thoroughly it sinks in.
Apparently, there was an English equivalent of Rosa Parks, and I did not know this.
I'm
not. All I heard was that it was an
familiar
English
with
equivalent. That. Yeah, it might be very very distantly related to what she did, but it might be exactly the same. I don't know. I was doing some reading after the episode because I really didn't want to talk about this and then get everything wrong. You know.
Yeah. You would, yeah.
But so actually, no, not aside from Rosa Parks. I want to talk about Rosa Parks because I think she was my favorite part of the. I almost said movie. I did that last week. Of the episode, was the actress who played her. I think she nailed it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I thought she did. She did a very good job.
I actually thought that she was American. Actually, I should have recognized her from Sherlock and a bunch of other places. 42, but I thought she was American, and I think I'm not a linguist, but I think that they nailed a very regional style of Southern American. It wasn't just the generic Southern drawl. I think they actually coached the actors on Alabama specifically.
Yeah. I don't know enough about Southern accents to say that with any authority. It sounded fine to me, but I'm not going to comment on that because I'm not from the Southern United States.
Right.
So to me, a completely fake Southern accent sounds exactly as real as an actual Southern accent.
I have a hunch, and I'm not gonna say it with any degree of authority. I have a hunch that they did their work and went for a more true to Alabama accent rather than a standard Southern accent, which I love that. I like the detail. If I'm right here, because there's a lot of great details in the episode that are specific to the real story, and I think that Rosa Parks, I think the actress did a really good job at emanating her.
Oh, one super minor thing to throw in just before I forget it, to add into our TARDIS discussion of last week.
That I was right.
I like it better now, having seen it. I feel like there were more shots of the complete TARDIS, and it was brighter.
It
And
was
I
worth it.
also really like the fact that I think people often call it the time rotor, the bit in the center of the console. It
Hmm.
actually goes up and down, which was my biggest issue with the Capaldi TARDIS was that it didn't do that. And I feel like you need that to suggest the motion of the TARDIS when you're inside, if that makes
I did
sense.
not notice this. I was looking at the
Yeah,
crystals and thinking of the
yeah.
creeping crystals from Avatar.
Yeah, well, it's like the big central crystal bit, but so both the basically all of the new series TARDISes until like the second Matt Smith slash Capaldi one had something inside of the central column that went up and down. The classic series ones, it was just a shorter thing that just went up and down. It didn't go all the way to the ceiling. And the new one seems to be more like the classic series one, where it doesn't go all the way to the ceiling and the whole thing goes up and down. But I
Oh,
think
I
you
know what you're
need,
talking about now.
yeah, I think you need that motion because otherwise, when you're inside the TARDIS, it seems very still. Whereas that's sort of a big action thing that lets you know the TARDIS is moving now. And they had the little things that spun around on the roof of the Capaldi TARDIS, but I feel like you have to crane the camera up to see that those are there and that they're moving. So it doesn't work as well as having something in the middle of the room, like really obviously moving.
Yeah, it makes for a more dynamic shot, and I think
Yeah.
that's why it's there, really. Yeah, I love the new TARDIS. I still love
Mm.
it.
Yeah. It's growing
It's
on me.
cool. It's growing like creeping crystals.
It's growing like creeping crystals.
Also growing on me, speaking of, is
Hmm.
the new companions. All of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's amazing.
especially Yaz. I think she had a lot of moments to
Yeah.
shine here. Well, two, but that's twice as many as she's had before. Graham is fast going up my list of companions. I think he's
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
Ryan's got some moments in this one finally. Like, he's not I don't remember exactly what I called him last week, but like he's not as boring now. He's got a little bit of a personality. Yeah, I think they're coming together.
I think it's basically that they were given great material to play with, and I think especially Yaz and Ryan were given a lot of good material here, being non-white people in 1950s Alabama. That
Yeah.
and so they've got a different perspective from the Doctor and Graham, and it's interesting to explore that perspective, and it gives them sort of an interesting character conflicts and interesting lines to say. Whereas in the last episode, they were pretty much just following along with the Doctor. And Bradley Walsh playing Graham, as I said last week, has a talent for being able to make his line readings interesting even when he's not given interesting lines. And I
Yeah, he
don't
does.
think that Ryan has the same ability. But this week he was given a lot of great material to work with, and so I think his performance really improved.
I think so. I think even aside from the moments where they had to interact with the past, just interacting with each other, I think they had a bit
Yeah.
more chemistry. That line where Yaz says, "Did you just accidentally pay me a compliment?" and she has that little laugh afterwards. I think her
Mhm.
character finally started to come through a bit in that moment,
Yeah.
um, and the relationship with each other, hinting
Yeah.
the ships have started. I'm sure after that line.
Yeah.
I'm pretty positive that's the direction they're going, but I can see it now. I can start to see that this is the direction that it might be taking. Um,
I just felt like they sort of really had their dialogue just had so much more spark to it. In general, everyone's dialogue just had more spark to it this week.
yeah, maybe not the doctors as much. I think maybe Chibnall's
Hmm.
better at writing her, but it's not like I disliked her dialogue. Like the only one that didn't have quite as much spark.
Hmm. I didn't think there was anything wrong with her dialogue. I didn't think her dialogue. Yeah, I think you're right that she didn't have as many. That she was a bit more subdued this week, which is, I think, an interesting case of where you often find that some writers are really good at writing some characters and other writers are really good at writing other characters.
Yeah,
Where I
it's not
think,
necessarily a bad thing either.
yeah,
Like, you can give the other characters their moments too.
yeah, like I don't think there was anything wrong with the Doctor's
No.
the Doctor's lines or performance at any point this week. It just wasn't. I think you're right though that it didn't have quite the same spark as last week. But part of that might be that last week she felt like the only interesting character.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
she was kind of carrying that episode last week. And she didn't
yeah,
have to this time,
yeah.
which is one form of improvement for sure.
Mhm.
I do think that character was improved here. The dialogue was sometimes better, but I'm still having trouble, even as I'm discussing with you. I'm having trouble getting over. I was kind of bored. Was not feeling any sort of suspense. My brother was in the
Hmm.
room, and he doesn't like Doctor Who. He wasn't watching it.
Yeah.
He was watching YouTube, but he said about 2/3 of the way through the episode, "When did Doctor Who get so boring?" And he's never called it boring. He's just been not
Oh.
interested in it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that actually he might have just been, giving me crap, but I feel like that was kind of indicative of how I felt of it. Is that this is different. This is not. There was something missing about that episode. I felt like, and I think it
I
was suspense for me.
I do feel like this era has, I mean, going off 3 episodes only, but it has a completely different set of flaws to both the Moffat and Russell T Davies era.
Yeah,
In a way, it feels to me much more different from them than Moffat and Russell T Davies felt from each other.
I think that the differences between Moffat and Davies are really like overstated. I think they're pretty
Yeah,
similar in style, at least, not necessarily quality.
yeah. I think that Chibnall is kind of seems much more straightforward. And when things fall flat in these episodes so far, it tends to be a case of them actually falling flat, like in terms of being kind of a bit dull. Whereas in the Moffat era, when things didn't work out, they tended to be more kinds of spectacular messes, which is more interesting to watch.
Yeah, with a couple of exceptions, I think when Moffat's
Yeah.
episodes failed, they went down in a blaze of glory.
It's like, yeah, you look at any of, I think for both of them, like Russell T Davies, the Slovene episodes, nobody's gonna accuse him of being boring.
Oh God. Oh man, I still can't
Yeah.
believe you told me that the you found the Slovenes episode to be like bearable even.
Yeah, well, I think it's like a case of I've seen it multiple times now, so I'm no longer just as annoyed by like the Slovene farting bits, and I still think they're stupid, the farting jokes. But I think that there's actually some good stuff buried in that episode, especially there's a lot of commentary on Iraq, which I think a lot of people miss. Even though the Slovene directly quote from it's either George W. Bush or Tony Blair that they directly quote at one point when they're saying when they say the alien ships have weapons of mass destruction deployable within 8 minutes or something like that, is a direct quote from when they were talking about why they needed to go into Iraq and fight Saddam Hussein.
I think that you just lost it. I maintain my position from last week.
Yeah.
So anything like major about the episode that we've missed? I'm gonna look through my notes on my phone real quick here.
I was not smart enough to take notes. Last week I actually took a couple of notes because there were specific things that I felt fell flat, and I realized why they fell flat, and I felt the need like to remember to remember why it was that they weren't working for me. Whereas this week, because first of all I just watched it, and second of all because I felt like it worked much better, I wasn't mentally keeping notes as much.
I'm glad I took notes because I almost forgot to bring up my most biggest problem that I left hanging earlier. So the resolution
Hmm.
was that they had to sit there while Rosa Parks made her stand and were unable to help her or give her any
Yeah.
sort of guidance, which I actually wrote down. Oh, Doctor can't help Frowny Face when it first happened. Uh, but as I was thinking about the episode afterwards, I realized I don't think Rosa cared because it's not like she was friends with the Doctor. It's not like she had started to like her or feel like she's an ally. She was kind of irritated with them. And
But
so
I
that
don't think that
moment,
matters. I don't think that that was factoring into their decision. I don't think it was a case of Rosa feeling like specifically betrayed by them. I
well,
think that the point was that they had to stand by and let this happen.
I
So
think that they missed an opportunity because that would have been a double gut punch. Because
it would
if
have been a
they,
double gut punch.
yeah, I think, and I feel like that would have been a very good moment to build up to. Like maybe they drop hints of like, hey, we're on your side. We, we're supporting you here, and then to have them suddenly abandon her at her biggest moments and
Mm.
Rosa never being able to know why, I feel like that would be the sort of ironic, cruel twist that you get in Vincent and the Doctor, which
Yeah.
is a really good gut punch, which and I talk about how it's kind of overrated in the first 30 minutes of that episode isn't good, but the last 10 is just an emotional roller coaster in a way that this ending was not. Because
Mm. Um.
I mean,
It didn't. I don't think it was. I don't think it was aiming to be as emotional as Vincent and the Doctor.
I think if you're playing that pop song, you're
Yeah. Yeah.
saying to the audience, this is the moment where you start to cry, because that's the only time that song's used. It's in a it's
Mm.
in a commercial or a trailer when it's like it's really emotional, powerful moment that they're trying to express and they can't more creatively think of a way to do
Yeah.
it.
There is honestly the funny thing was I was saying on a message board before this season started when they used some pop songs in the trailers which you're probably not aware of because you live under a rock and don't watch trailers.
I didn't watch
Um,
a single trailer.
yeah, so they used some pop music in the last couple trailers, and people were complaining about it, and I was just saying pop music in trailers is a really common thing, but what I said was may start complaining if they start doing that American television show thing of playing pop music of a sad scene so that you know you're supposed to feel sad.
It's such an Americanism,
They
and they
did,
did
they
it.
just did it, but I mean, I suppose the episode was set in America, so,
Well,
but,
what I saw on the Reddit thread was A, you did hire a new dude to write music, and you could have written an original score for it, or B, why not use like a contemporary song instead of this very overused pop song that's like in
yeah.
every single commercial for
Yeah,
a movie like this.
Vincent and the Doctor used a pop song as well, but I seem to recall that working a bit better. Whereas
Well, like
here, yeah.
End of the World had Toxic, and it's a great moment. And it's not
Oh,
used for
that's the
drama,
best use of pop music in all of Doctor Who.
right? It's
Yeah, they're
specifically
never
that
gonna
song.
top
I
that.
can't count how many times I've heard that song in
Yeah,
TV, and it just seemed like the most. I want to say cliche and lazy, and I feel like that might be a little bit too harsh, but
yeah.
borderline cliche and lazy.
It was kind of a weird moment in an episode that was otherwise well constructed.
Yeah, and especially to have it at the climax too.
Hmm.
It it was just it was frustrating. It was
Yeah.
because it's never this has Doctor Who ever really used a song in that very American drama TV show way?
Like kind of Vincent and the Doctor, but that's
Kind of,
pretty much the only time. Well, I
and it
suppose
really didn't work
yeah.
either.
Well, I suppose
I don't
that
remember it in Vincent's.
it's there, but it's a lot softer,
It's not as
and it's
cloying.
not as cloying, and it doesn't overwhelm the entire scene.
I
But
yeah.
Yeah.
I think my eventual number grade went down in like a full number just because of that choice. Because it's the most important scene, and you just blare a generic pop song over what was a really well written and executed scene before that. Like I
You
was
know what was worse?
what?
You know what was terrible? BBC America started showing the end credits now, which is great, but I think they did it because everyone was complaining after the first episode, because
And then it was, and then it
that was
showed
some
up in
bullshit
the end
there.
credits.
um, but they had that music over the end credits.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
actually my last note is all caps in the credits.
Okay, we may want to use some bleeping sounds here. Yeah.
I know how to mute, so
Okay. We
yeah.
can just mute.
Muting is more professional anyway than a bleep sound.
Yes.
But yeah, like oh, that bothered me, and I don't know exactly why it bothered me so much. Apparently, it bothered you too, so I'm not
Yeah.
crazy, or we're
For
both
me,
crazy.
it's the Doctor Who credits are almost kind of like uh they're such an intrinsic part of the show.
Uh,
And there is one instance of in the classic series they had the end credits go silent, which was after a character died. That is the
I
last
know what you're
time.
talking about. That's one of the few classic Who references I get.
Yeah, that's like the only time until now that the end credits have been tampered with, as far as I'm aware, was to have them silent because the character was dead.
Yeah, I think silence would
And
have worked. I think even just
silent,
an
yeah,
instrumental, maybe slowed down version of the song would have been okay.
yeah,
But to just do the song again, it just seemed like, they were beating you over the head with this was emotional, you're supposed to cry, it's inspirational. Remember the song
yeah.
that we
I
just
think,
played
yeah,
literally a minute ago. It was a 1-2 punch, but not in the good way for me.
yeah, and I think that's something that can be solely placed on Chibnall.
I think so. I
Because
don't blame a writer for
there's
a
no
poor song
way that
choice.
Mallory Blackman specifically wrote into her script, I'd like you
And
to
then we
use
played this
some
song.
cloying pop music here, and then I'd like you to replace the Doctor Who end credits with said cloying pop music.
Yeah, I don't think that was in the script. I
Yeah,
blame Chibnall. Maybe the
yeah.
director. I don't know how directing and music choices go. I'm not. I keep
I
talking
think
about
that
film
music choices
technique,
are
and I'm not a
mostly
film person.
down to the director.
Hmm.
But I feel like for something as big as the end credits I don't think are going to be put together by the director. I feel like that's going to be the producer.
Yeah, that I'm pretty sure that was Chibnall, and
Yeah.
it was frustrating. But I did that. I think that's my last major complaint, and I've been spending most of the time complaining, and I'm not a fan of this one, but there are good moments in it, and there's hope for uh, the future episodes because I think that it was clear that a different writer handled these supporting characters better than Chibnall.
Yes. The bad news is that a large number of the next chunk of episodes are written by Chibnall.
And yeah, we were
Yeah.
talking about that last week. I
Yeah.
don't I don't know. I think it's
And
been
yeah.
released in full. Has it? Has the like list of writers and episodes been fully released yet?
No. Which is
Oh,
really
okay.
unusual because normally we know them by like the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I
Whereas,
I do like this.
yeah, he's being much more secretive about everything. There are some points where I feel like it's a bit excessive, but so far he's been very secretive about the episode titles and the episode writers. Like we know who the writers are, but we don't know what their episodes are going to be about for sure.
Okay.
There are lots of cases where there are rumors which are essentially confirmed. Like, but
Okay.
there
Yeah,
aren't
I'm I
there hasn't been any official announcements past. I think episode 6 is as far as it goes, which isn't very
I'm
far because
just
it's
in
only
the
three
dark.
episodes that's only 3 episodes ahead.
Yeah, that's very unusual.
Yeah.
Well, so there's hope that some episodes, maybe a minority of the ones that are left, will be handled by a different writer and someone who's gonna write these side characters better than the person who created them, ironically.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think this episode did show in some parts that my optimism from last week was warranted, because the parts that felt like they were written by a different writer did work more than they didn't. And um, I did complain about the Chibnall style problem solution thing though, and I
Hmm.
am worried that that might be a recurring thing in this season.
I didn't, like I said, I felt a lot of tension in this episode, so I feel like that's kind of just your opinion may vary. As opposed to last episode, I felt like there was a pretty definitive lack of tension there. Because we both agreed on
Actually,
that. And I couldn't, and pretty much all of the criticisms online were saying that there was no tension.
I said that there was tension in the first half, and I never felt
Oh,
much,
yeah.
other than the motel scene. That was the exception. In last week, I felt suspense and tension for the first 20 or 30 minutes, and then it all went away.
Yeah.
And this one, it was like a very good 5 minute scene where I felt tense, and then otherwise not.
Mm. The one thing I would have quite liked would have been more detail surrounding the bit where where the racist guy gets blasted back into the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I felt like that was a
I thought he
sort of.
got blasted into the future.
No, he gets
I
he
thought
gets
he.
blasted into the past. Ryan specifically says
Oh,
if you like the past so much, like try living in it or something like that, and blasts him into. And he says he threw him back as far as it would go.
this is embarrassing because I watched it twice, but I guess he did just finish it.
Yeah, but so I felt like that was a very fitting fate for the character. Like
That
it's sort
makes
of
more
like a
sense.
fun. It's like a fun kind of play on the fact that that he's sort of such a regressive person who's gonna get blasted back, like he literally regressed in time. But I felt
Well, it's
like,
poetic
yeah,
justice.
poetic justice. I felt like it would have been better with some kind of follow up or some kind of actual like something further to it than that, if that makes sense. Like seeing him in this time or knowing what time he'd been sent to.
Like he wakes up in a gladiator ring in ancient Rome with like a cross around his neck or something like that.
Yeah. Like, or, yeah, any number of things where he could have. Or just like, or some scene where he gets thrown far back into the past and he finds that there are still like racial minorities everywhere. Would have been like a really nice sort of bitter, like, yeah,
Yeah, now that I know that's what happened, I agree with you. I think that would have been that
yeah,
was an opportunity for them
yeah.
that they passed on.
Like it was still a great scene. Actually, although I wouldn't be surprised if something like that was maybe considered and then cut because budget, because that would require an entire like new set, new actors, new costumes, new everything for one like
Right,
scene. And so
right.
I
And he
wouldn't.
wasn't
That
really the
seems like the
most
kind of
like
thing that gets.
compelling. He wasn't the most compelling figure in Doctor Who history either.
I liked him. He had a lot of good. Well, like not in the sense of liked him as a person, obviously, but he had a lot of
I
good
thought he was a
lines.
saint.
He had a lot of good lines. He had a semi-interesting backstory. I love the idea of the neural inhibitor. I thought that was
That
a
was
great
good.
idea. The idea that he can't kill people, so he has to go about this the most complicated way he can. Which was an interesting
Yeah, I
question
like
because you
that.
normally run into the issue of why wouldn't he just shoot Rosa Parks in the face?
That was a clever way to set up the story for sure.
Yeah, it's also like
And
just
it,
a fun science fiction concept of like this hardened criminal who's got this inhibitor that means he can't actually kill people.
yeah, so he has to find other ways to do it. I actually thought when I was watching the episode the first time that it was an American actor, because I thought his
Hmm.
accent was off. But he's English. He's from Revenge, and he's English there, and I think he has the same accent. So I'm just bad at accents, which means you should probably discount what I said earlier about the whole
Yeah.
There was an authentic Alabama accent, says someone who can't tell an English actor.
Well, I think there's one scene where he does an American accent, and then he does it in
Yeah,
his English accent for the rest of the episode. So that kind of
yeah. He
threw
talks
me for a
to
second. He talks to
he
Rosa
talks
Parks
to the bus driver.
and the
Oh,
bus
and Rosa
driver.
Parks.
Yeah, yeah. So two scenes I think where he's got a few lines where he talks with an American accent because he's trying to fit in.
Yeah, so that might have been why I thought he was slipping up a bit. So, anything else before we go into final thoughts? I'm gonna look through my notes one more time, even though I already did.
Um, no, I don't think so. Although, so this week, I do remember. So on the music, in addition to the pop music, I just felt like the music in general this week wasn't that great, and that I'm kind of fully back onto the side of I kind of miss Murray Gold now, because I feel like he would have given us some great scores there, whereas this episode's music felt very generic.
Yeah, I mean, I still am in love with the main theme,
Yeah, the main
but
theme is incredible.
when I was rewatching it, I was actually looking for a moment in the score where I could have said, "Oh, you could have put that in instead of the pop song," but there wasn't one.
Yeah, there was like this weird theme that they kept. There were a couple of themes they kept using, but I didn't feel like either of them was a strong enough theme to keep using.
Yeah, it was subdued like it has been before, but it also there was never a moment where it really stood out. And the
Yeah,
last two have
it.
had a moment.
No, I think that it was all kind of. Is that it kind of felt like kind of wallpaper music?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like there was a thing that happened in the Star Trek shows where early in Next Generation they had a full sort of orchestra, and then a guy came in and he fired the guy who was in charge of the music, and he like removed the orchestra and everything, and his idea was that the music should essentially just be sonic wallpaper outside of the main themes, in that it should just be like music to convey, like to very briefly convey like the sense of action in action scenes, something emotional in like emotional scenes, but very sort of like just to the point music that doesn't do any, that's essentially just very generic and doesn't have any like artistic merit to it. And I feel like that sounds really mean, but that was the kind of the vibe I got off of bits of the music in this episode.
Do you want a quick hot take that's off topic before we go into final
Of
thoughts?
course.
I think that's exactly how I would describe the Trent Reznor scores in David Fincher movies. Sonic wallpaper, not good on its own. And everyone goes crazy for his scores, and I'm like, I don't get it.
Mm,
It's just tones.
yeah. I think it also may be a case of in some episodes a score like that will work better than in others. Like I
Yeah,
felt it
maybe.
worked better in it worked really well I think in the first two episodes, and then in this episode it just felt like the score was, it felt like the episode was calling for a more Murray Gold-esque score and wasn't getting it.
Well, also the 50s is like a golden age of American music. You had this
Yeah.
big bombastic swing and big
Yeah.
band stuff, and it was a little bit like you couldn't take a little bit of that and add it to the episode, and yeah, I agree. It was lackluster. So, do you want to start final thoughts with the positive or the negative take?
Uh, you can go first if you want, so we can end on a positive note.
All right. I think I've been pretty clear about my thoughts on it. There are good moments superficially with acting and the dialogue being improved, um, but the bigger picture of the episode as a compelling piece of drama was not there. I did not feel suspense. I felt like it was pretty clear that they had to do a specific ending, um, and they did that ending that I was expecting them to do. Uh, I felt like they missed a golden opportunity for a real gut punch with not
Mm.
making it feel like Rosa Parks got betrayed by the Doctor, which I felt like would have been a really good heartbreaker of an ending. And instead, she actually gave a little wave to them, at least to Ryan, and, and that undercut a lot of the emotional power that the ending could have had. And then the song comes in, and the song comes in at the end. And I forgot to mention the sappy bit at the end with the asteroid, and she changed the entire universe because an asteroid is named after her. So overall, I mean, they avoided complete disaster. This could have been one of the worst episodes of anything ever if they had taken it in the first direction people would have thought that they would have gone in. But ultimately, it's going to be forgettable, and I'm going to give it a 6.
Ooh. So, I was much more positive about it. I did have a few little nitpicks about it. I also think that the asteroid thing, I can't believe I forgot that was very odd, in that it didn't feel like that was actually in any way a celebration of her accomplishments that she got an asteroid named after her.
Yeah,
Like, it wasn't even like a Doctor Who futurish asteroid where people of all races live in peace. It's like a literal asteroid out in space.
It's a rock.
And they're just like, this is Rosa Parks' legacy, a rock. But
one of my friend's little sisters has a star in space named after her because there's a company that literally you pay them $20 and you get a star named after you.
I've always felt those things are probably just scams, and nobody's ever going to actually acknowledge that those stars are named after people.
That's quite possible, but go on with your conclusion.
But so overall I liked it. Like I said, it was the closest thing we've had to a proper historical episode since the 80s. It wasn't quite one, but it was like close enough that I'm going to give it to them because I just really want one. I felt like it did, like I said, it walked into a minefield of issues and it somehow managed to come out with only one sort of minor nitpick in terms of the historical aspect of it. And I felt it handled all of that very well, although I'm so white that I'm not really qualified to talk about whether it handled that well or not. But overall, I liked the episode. There were strong performances. The characters all felt better this time. The dialogue had a lot more spark. I liked the villain's dialogue. I liked, all the guest actors, very good. So overall, I'm gonna say that I had a pretty positive view of it with just like a few minor issues. Liked it much better than last week. I'm somewhere between a 7.5 and an 8. I think I'm going to go for a 7.5 because I don't think it quite makes it up to an 8. But also I feel like I'm grading much harsher this season than I did last season. So I feel like that may end up being unfair if we ever actually go back and do like a how did I score this season compared to previous seasons. I feel like my scores have gotten harsher in general. So, I'm going to give it an 8. I'm going to give it that 8.
An 8? Mine have gotten harsher only because since Series 9 was so good, everything was like 9, 9.5. And now there's actually some episodes that are in the gray area.
Yeah, it's just kind of a case of I'm just like, I don't know whether I'm considering a 7.5, like, am I treating that as if it's a C, like a grade? Or am I treating that like it's very good, if that makes sense. So, but
I feel like one of these days we should explain our rationale behind our 1 through 10s.
I feel like I should develop a rationale behind my 1 through 10s as opposed to just randomly shouting out an episode at the end of our discussion and pretending that there was some kind of rational thought that went into it.
Mine's like, I see it as close to a letter grade, but not really. Like 6 would be not quite a D. It would be like the bare minimum to pass, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then below 6 is fail, and above 6 is excelled.
Yeah, I feel like that makes sense. So somewhere 7.5 to 8 is pretty much what I'm feeling for this, where I was just like, it was good, not exceptional, but good, as opposed to last week, which I did put at a 6, which is essentially just sort of barely above failing. Yeah. So I am being harsher this season, but I feel like I've got a lot to be harsh to, especially for the last week's episode.
You cut out a whole lot right there. I couldn't even get context clues. But was that a good spot to end on, or do you have like
I
a last
guess
final
that's a
thought?
good I guess that's a good spot to end on. So we can stop
Okay, 'cause
recording.
I have no idea. All right, I'll stop the recording. I have no idea what you said.